I'm Bob Bursey, the Executive Director of Texas Performing Arts at UT Austin. Thank you so much for joining us for this virtual Broadway in Austin subscribers town hall. We miss seeing you all at the theater so very, very much and are thrilled to have this opportunity to connect with you and share with you what's happening with Broadway touring across the country and with Broadway in Austin specifically. So the way we'll work this afternoon is that I'm going to introduce our very, very special guest who will give us quite extraordinary perspective on the whole field of Broadway and what's happening across the country and what's happening with Broadway touring productions. And then we'll talk a bit specifically about Broadway in Austin and some of the steps that we're taking here at the University of Texas and at Texas Performing Arts to get ready to reopen and welcome you back to the theater. And then we'll make sure to leave plenty of time to answer the questions that have been submitted already, as well as any other questions that might arise during the conversation. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat. My colleague Tara Vella and others here at Texas Performing Arts will keep track of those and help facilitate the Q&A portion. And I want to acknowledge some folks who are with us this afternoon. John Breckenridge, who's the Vice President of the Southwest region for Broadway Across America, and Wendy Reichstein, who's the Director of Marketing for the Southwest region at Broadway Across America, two really, really terrific colleagues who are with us from Houston who helped to make everything at Broadway in Austin happen. And then also from Texas Performing Arts, my colleagues Tara Vella, Erica De Leon, Lizzie Schoeffel, and Brenda Sims are with us. And so you might interact with them behind the scenes when you're ticketing or getting help with your subscription, and just want to thank them for their time and efforts and energy putting this all together. So before we get started and I introduce our guest this afternoon, I did want to share a short greeting from some of our seasoned artists, because really the artists, of course, in the shows are what bring us together for so much enjoyment and inspiration in the theater. And we have a little hello from them that we wanted to share with you.
What's up, Austin?
Hello, Austin.
Hi, Austin. I'm Talia Suskauer, and I play Elphaba in the North American tour of Wicked.
I am Allison Bailey, and I play the role of Glinda on the North American tour of Wicked.
It's Megan Mazago Haley. I play Gretchen in the North American tour of Tina Fey's Mean Girls. Anyway, we cannot wait to get back on the road so we can explore your city and once again share the magic of Broadway together with you on your beautiful stage.
I wanted to let you know that here at Wicked, we are thinking about you and your families.
We can't wait to see you when we get back out on the road.
I personally cannot wait to play Bass Concert Hall. Until then, much love to you and yours.
Stay safe and healthy.
See you all soon.
So it's my real pleasure to introduce our guest this afternoon, Lauren Reid. And Lauren is the Chief Operating Officer of the John Gore organization, which is probably one of the certainly most important organizations in live entertainment in this country. And Lauren is someone who has really demonstrated a lifelong commitment to extending the reach of Broadway and sharing it with folks all across the country and around the world even. And the John Gore organization is the parent company of Broadway Across America and other Broadway enterprises. And Broadway Across America provides entertainment and inspiration in 47 cities, I believe, around the country, and brings Broadway more than 35 million theater fans every year. And Lauren has been so instrumental in making that happen and growing that movement all across the country. And not only that, earlier this year, Lauren was voted to be the chair-elect of the Broadway League, which is the trade association for the Broadway industry. So that's all of the theater owners and operators, the producers and presenters, and the general managers that bring you these performances. So there's, I couldn't think of anyone better to lead the field through this really difficult time. And not only that, Lauren also is a Texan. She started her professional career right here in Austin and is a University of Texas at Austin alum. So it's a double or triple pleasure to welcome Lauren Reid and give you our warmest Texas welcome. Thanks for joining us, Lauren.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Bob. Really appreciate it.
So I wanted to ask Lauren, as you're really leading touring Broadway through this time, what are some of the guiding principles that you all are working with?
Our number one focus right now is to design a plan and be prepared for a safe and responsible return and reopening of Broadway, both in New York and touring. So we spend a lot of time managing that, and I think second, but not second in importance, but equally, we want to continue to keep our audiences informed and lead with a customer first mentality and mission to make sure our subscribers and Broadway fans are taken care of and communicated with as often as necessary during these unprecedented times. So it's twofold. Take care of the shows and take care of the audiences and get back to work.
Right, absolutely. And I know we said that on March 13th, I think, which is at Texas Performing Arts, that the health and well-being of our audiences and our staff and our artists is our top priority. And that's as true today, these many months into this crisis, as it was then. So I think we really share that commitment. You know, Lauren, you have such a unique perspective and a real direct connection into what's happening with the shows themselves. I wonder if you could share a little bit of that with us in terms of how are the producers and the productions managing during this time?
Right. You know what I would say, specifically speaking about touring Broadway, it's a really challenging business, even in the best of times. There are a lot of logistics to manage. There are, at any given year, any time, typically about 30 to 40 different shows that travel weekly across the country, actually across North America and Canada as well. And scheduling those shows is difficult, and it's twofold. One, there are shows that are already produced, like in the case of you all have seen I will say fairly recently, Dear Evan Hansen and Come From Away in Austin. So those tours have been out and have been traveling across the country. While there are other tours that have not yet been what we call mounted. And so the producers in each of those cases, for each of those, a touring and traveling show that's already been opened and out, and a producer that is preparing a show to get opening out, kind of face different challenges. And you know, the first one is assembling the capitalization, the financing required to mount those tours. And in the case of a touring that already exists, like Come From Away, it's already been mounted, but there are remount costs. So you must look at those and kind of figure out where and how you're going to remount. Are you going to have, there are about 50 or 60 people traveling with a small show like Come From Away. Those 50 or 60 people consist of musicians, your cast, your crew, and your managers. And there are about, in the case of Come From Away, 5 to 6 18-wheeler trucks that move the sets and the costumes and the pieces in and out of a city. In the case of A Lion King, you know, you could have 25 trucks and twice as many cast and crew. So very different kind of looks. In the case of Moulin Rouge, which is a new show that hasn't yet been built for the road, it's played in New York. They are just now thinking about how they've got to get their sets in the scenic shops, how they have to cast their show. They don't have them cast yet. Come From Away has it cast. So Come From Away has to figure out right now how many of their cast will come back, how many of their crew will come back, and then they're going to have to re-rehearse. They're going to have to make sure all of their equipment is working and up and running. And frankly, they're going to have to go find where they left their set pieces. I think they closed their show. I think they were in Dallas in March when everything shut down. So they've got to get all of that stuff out and move it and then remount and cast. In the case of a Moulin Rouge, which is a new show that hasn't yet toured, but wants to get on the road and has been scheduled to open during this pandemic, or was scheduled, they still have to, again, get everything designed by their creatives, get everything cast, rehearsed, and then configure their tour and get out on the road. It's very complicated. And if you throw into this right now, the regulations of the protocols and the health and safety and the government regulations, it makes it ever the more complicated logistically.
Absolutely. What a puzzle. And it really does point out the complexity of touring Broadway. When you think about a new show that might be getting ready to go out, they really, as you say, ought to be casting or rehearsing in New York now. And of course, that's so difficult to do, as so many places around the country are in various stages of reopening. And it's so interesting that you mentioned where some sets have been marooned. I think actually we still have some of the Aladdin production here in Austin that they're waiting to be able to get. It's not in our building, it's in storage, but we just don't have the ability to bring a really large crew together to get that transferred and back in the trucks and headed out. So that's certainly the case.
Yeah. There are about 40 of those shows marooned in different theaters across the country right now.
Yeah, and I wonder, Lauren, what's happening in other cities around the country? Again, you have this very broad view, and you're working in all of these individual communities, which have their own particular, as you said, regulatory situations happening. What does that look like from your perspective?
You know, all of the cities right now are dealing with the same issues, honestly, and looking at the scheduling and what is currently on the books and planning to play, and rejiggering that and working very closely with the shows to figure out if the shows are available when the dates are available and when they're buildings. And every building right now is working very hard. I don't have to tell you on the safety guidelines and the protocols that you will be putting in place to make it not just comfortable, but safe for people to return. So I think right now, all of what we call presenters, so all of our colleagues in all of the theaters across the country are working very closely with booking agents and with producers to determine when each show, depending upon its own kind of schedule and position, whether it's remounting or a brand new show, will be able to reopen, and working with their local governments on kind of the guidelines and frankly the regulations, if they will be able to do that. It's complicated because in touring, you know, the financial model of a tour, in order to recoup or recover, you know, the cost of putting all of this together, a producer needs about 40 touring weeks of Broadway in order to hopefully make a profit. And those weeks in all of those theaters, if a theater stop is from a Tuesday to a Sunday, they need to be contiguous, both geographically and on a calendar, right, to make sense. So you can't go from Dallas to Orlando in a week's time. The trucks just won't make it. So we really have to, like you said, it's a jigsaw puzzle, try and work together to figure out what cities will be able to be reopened and how that fits in with the actual geographical and creative calendar of the show.
Yeah, wow, it's just incredible. And it really reminds me of one of the most amazing things about this work is that it really is at the intersection of the very, very practical and the most imaginative and creative. It's where those two things come together. So the logistics of how quickly and how far can a convoy of semi-trucks travel set up against the imagination and creative expression of the artists who create and bring us these performances is really pretty magical and makes it so difficult. So as you're saying, it's not only about what our availability is to maybe reschedule a show here in Austin, it's about how does that align with the availability of San Antonio or Houston or Dallas, and then even cities further afield from there, Tempe, New Orleans, and so forth. So
and I'll throw just another kind of hurdle to jump over at you. Okay, so you've got those kind of hurdles to kind of address, but you also have a creative team that they have schedules and calendars too. So in a case of, let's just say, a show like a Moulin Rouge, there's nothing like a challenge of kind of touring a brand new show that hasn't totally been mounted for the road, but you have a director who is also needing to reopen that show in New York on Broadway, who had planned already for an opening in the UK, right, in London, and also Australia, and also has another show in Beetlejuice, which may be moving theaters in New York. So you've got to work with, and that's just a director, never mind some of the other creative teams. So it's a calendar of many that really has to come together.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's particularly impactful for Broadway and Austin because our 2021 season had a real focus on new shows with productions like Hadestown and Mockingbird. So that's really certainly rings true for me. And I wonder, Lauren, as we look to the future and the recovery of our field, because you're involved in so many different aspects of it, is there anything that you feel particularly hopeful about or optimistic around at this time?
You know, I think that, listen, I think this has been an incredibly difficult time, and out of difficult times, a lot of good comes, and working so much more closely with our colleagues, I think has been a real benefit and boon, and will actually probably be helpful in the future to just getting things done in a more efficient way. I do believe in my heart of hearts that there is a lot of incredible writing going on, and that new works will be developed and are being developed now that will have benefited from this experience. People are home and there's not a whole lot to distract you. So I think a lot of work is getting done. And I do think we are going to hear from both new creative teams and we may even see new audiences. There's a lot of work being done in our theater community with diversity. And I think I think we will see that reflected in the coming years for sure. So all of those things I think are fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the possibility of getting to look forward to some new creative work that's happening at home, as you say. It's a nice image of those playwriters and composers and book writers just working away while they're quarantined.
Yes.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Lauren. We really appreciate it. All the more so knowing that you and your team are actually on vacation this week. So grateful for you joining us and sharing your perspective.
Thank you. It was good to be here. I'm gonna listen into the rest if that's okay.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Great. So I'll talk a little bit more specifically about Austin and what we're doing here at TPA. And maybe I'll start just by speaking about some of the productions, starting with our 1920 season, just so we're all sort of on the same page and caught up to speed about what's happening with particular shows. So of course we had to cancel Aladdin, which was on in mid-March. I think we got through 2 performances, I believe, an opening night and a Wednesday matinee was performed, and then we canceled that Wednesday evening and couldn't play the rest of that 2-week run. So many people didn't get to see that production. And we are hoping to bring that back in a future season. That is one production where Disney Theatricals, the producer, has said that they do hope to put Aladdin back out on the road. It's such a great title and a great story, and they do want to bring that out on tour, and we are hopeful that we will be able to get that back to Austin in a future season. The opposite is true of A Bronx Tale, where for some of the reasons that Lauren mentioned, the producers have decided that they are not going to put that show back out on the road. That the challenges of recapitalizing it, recasting it, standing it back up is just more than they feel like they can handle for a production that has already been on the road for a bit and had something of a good, strong touring life. So in that case, it in actual fact isn't a possibility for us to bring A Bronx Tale back to Austin. And it'll be a bit different case by case. So for the 2021 season, hopefully folks have heard from us and are aware that Summer, the Donna Summer musical, originally scheduled to play in September, has been rescheduled to a full year forward into September of 2021. And then Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, that was scheduled to play here in Austin in December of 2020, has been rescheduled into July of 2021. So our first choice really is, when necessary, to reschedule these productions. And so the kind of complex jigsaw puzzle of cities, which we call routing, that Lauren was describing, really relates to rescheduling. So when the season is first put together, all of that is very intricately mapped out. And the reason it's thrown so much into flux is by having to reschedule these dates. So that's where we're having to rework those connections between cities and the availabilities of those theaters, and how do they align with the availabilities of the shows is really what's behind that. So it is, of course, possible that there will be further changes to the Broadway in Austin 2021 season. We've gone out through December at this point, and we're still working with our producing partners and our colleagues at Broadway across America to see what changes we might need to make for 2021. And one of the reasons that we're having to look at postponing performances is because in order for touring Broadway to work, we need to be at 100% capacity in the theater. So theater, particularly touring Broadway, is really not compatible with the idea of social distancing in the theater itself. So while there may be other types of performing arts or other events that Texas Performing Arts may be able to do at a reduced capacity with social distancing in the theater, touring Broadway is not one of those events that will work in that context. And that's true on Broadway in New York, and it's true for touring Broadway all across the country. So that really puts us in the position of needing to wait until it is safe to come back at 100% capacity. And even when we are able to do that, of course, there will be many safety protocols and things that we'll be doing to mitigate the risk of coming to the theater. And I'll speak about some of that. Texas Performing Arts is in one of the first phases of its reopening plan. I'm actually in the office here at Bass Concert Hall today, as is some of the other staff. We've reopened our production shops. Of course, we have University of Texas at Austin is back open, with the vast majority of our educational activity taking place online, but there are some students on campus, a few rehearsals happening in our academic theater and dance programs. So we are starting to reawaken the sort of sleeping beast and bring folks back together in the theater. All of our events are virtual for the time being, but hoping to step into some in-person activity as we go on in the fall. Folks may have seen, for instance, that UT Austin, just across campus, has masks required, and we anticipate that that is certainly going to be the case for the foreseeable future. We've been doing a lot of work on our heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system. I now know more about theater HVAC and air filtration than I ever expected to. But there have been a number of improvements to our filtration and the balance of outside air and the rate of circulation. It turns out that that's a really, really critical aspect of bringing folks into the theater and doing that in a healthy way. So we've put a lot of resources and effort into that. And I think you can expect that when we are able to resume performances, some of the things that we're used to may not be able to be offered. So for instance, our approach to concessions may need to change. It may not make sense for us to offer valet. We'll certainly need to do a lot to limit high density points within our building. So the stage door or the lobbies, those are areas where social distancing can happen, and it is possible to make some space in those areas, limit the capacities in elevators, make sure that whether there does need to be a queue or a line, that we have appropriate distance there. Those are all things that we've mapped out and have clearly in focus. And of course, there's a lot of work happening with the artists and with our staff as well. One thing that I'm excited about that we have access to that some of our peers around the country have found more challenging is that the University of Texas at Austin actually has its own COVID-19 testing laboratory set up. And we here at Texas Performing Arts have access to that for performing regular proactive testing of our staff. And we think that that's going to be an important thing to extend to our visiting companies, our traveling artists as well. So we're doing things like symptom pre-screening for staff, making sure that no one is penalized for coming to work when they're not feeling well. That's such an important aspect of this. And then also sanitization in the theater itself, in the lobbies, backstage. We have a very, very rigorous set of protocols around keeping those spaces clean. When you are able to come visit us again, you'll find hand sanitizer stations all throughout the lobby. Those are actually all already in place and ready to welcome you back. And that's been one of the really tricky parts of this, is just getting access to those materials has been such a challenge. But fortunately, through the sort of larger buying power of the university, we were able to get towards the front of the line to be able to get some of those things here in Austin. So I think that's a sort of overview of what we're looking at, and I'll get more specific as we go through questions. Maybe I'll ask you, Tara, if you could just share with me some of the questions that have come in advance that I might be able to address.
What if I don't feel safe attending a performance and need to cancel my tickets?
Yeah, that's such a big consideration for so many people. And my recommendation would really be to get in touch with us to discuss your options, and that we've been handling those requests on a case-by-case basis. And as Lauren said, really putting our customers first and understanding the extenuating circumstances that everyone is in around this. So you could contact us here at Texas Performing Arts, or you could get in touch with the subscriber hotline to talk with them about what the options are for your subscription.
Another question was, how will you ensure staff do not work if they are ill?
Right. Yeah, that's a really important question. We have a symptom pre-screening app that employees are using. So it's something that UT Austin has developed, where before coming into work every day, you're required to perform a symptom self-assessment and input your responses into an app, which allows us to screen employees before they even leave their homes. And then that, combined with the proactive testing that I mentioned, are two of the main strategies that we're using to mitigate risk for our staff. Also, we're looking really carefully at, as I said, traffic flow backstage, thinking about, for our artists, the layout of the orchestra pit for instance, and what is the best solution for players of wind and brass instruments, and how can we keep them safe when they come back into the building and they're back in the orchestra pit. So those are all considerations that we're working on.
Someone asked about why not going virtual if it's if we need 100% capacity,
right,
and social distancing isn't an option, why not go virtual?
Right. Yeah, that's such a good question. I think that's one of the interesting things that has come out of this time is more of an embrace of online experiences for theater and dance and classical music. That as a field, in some respects, we've been maybe a little bit slower to embrace that than we could have been. And I'm sure many people saw the Hamilton film on Disney Plus, which was just extraordinarily well done. And there's lots of great online content coming forward from sort of all corners. It's almost like the floodgates have really opened around that. And I think we'll continue to see films of Broadway productions be made available online. Certainly, I think In the Heights is in the pipeline. The Prom is another one that I think is working on a quite high quality film. And I think those are really valuable offerings and interesting experiences. And for us, we really prioritize that live moment and that live experience of being in the theater with the performers. And so we want to dedicate our efforts to getting back to that in the best way that we can, as soon as we can. So I'm certainly supportive of all of the creators who are making their creative expression available online, and also realize that our mission to connect people to performance is something that happens when we are all in the same space at the same time, sharing in that live moment. And so that remains really top of mind for us.
Lots of questions about, maybe we have empty seats in the theater even when we're at 100% sellable capacity, right? So if there's empty seats, can people move around? That kind of thing. I oversee operations, and so that makes me cringe a bit about people, moving around and that whole situation. But there is a lot of questions about the true 100% capacity. So
Sure.
anything to add?
Yeah, I really understand that, right? I'm certainly someone who, in before COVID times, if there was a free seat on the airplane, maybe I was in a middle seat and there was an aisle seat over there, I would love to move into that aisle seat. And maybe sometimes that's possible and sometimes it's not. Of course, as a theater producer and presenter, I scoff at the notion of ever having any empty seats, right? We want to sell every single one and share these experiences with as many people as possible. But of course, realistically speaking, that doesn't always happen. And that's a question that we really haven't addressed in our reopening plan, and is something that we should certainly think about. We have spent a fair amount of time looking at, for instance, what's called timed entry. So how to meter the flow of people coming in and out of the theater. So for instance, individuals who may be at a higher risk, is there a possibility to create a special time for them to come early perhaps, and have more opportunity with lower density of people to reach their seats in the theater? And is that something that is valuable? And we've heard in our surveys and our planning that could be really important and that people would appreciate that. So we are looking at some of those different ideas.
You touched on this regarding time to entry, but kind of the checks that might be in place for patrons entering the facility, whether it be temperature checks, anything else that we would be doing, maybe a little bit more about that.
Right, yeah, because I did mention symptom pre-screening for artists and staff. And so of course the real corollary question to that is, what about the audience? And symptom pre-screening, that kind of self-check, is very, very important. We've learned a lot from our colleagues at Del Med and UT Health Austin. They've been treating COVID patients since March. They're responsible for a lot of the contact tracing that's happening here in Austin, and have really been, those clinicians have really been on the leading edge of this pandemic here locally. And I feel so fortunate to have been able to consult with that group of doctors and get their input into our reopening plans, because I know that's something that some of my colleagues around the country haven't had access to. And those doctors have really shared with us the importance of that symptom self-check, right? So to know if you're exhibiting any of the symptoms of COVID-19, and if so, if you don't feel well, to please stay home. So we will be asking people to do that. We'll be putting that forward, I think, in a code of conduct for folks who are coming to the theater as a policy for joining us in person. Specifically about temperature screening, the evidence on that is mixed. The medical professionals who we're consulting with so far have advised us that that can sometimes do more harm than good if it creates a bottleneck on entry. So that's something to really be considerate of. And that also in a hot climate like Austin or Central Texas, that skin temperature screening may not be a reliable indicator. So we've been taking a really measured approach to that particular item, but in general, asking for symptom self-screening, I think, will be something that we'll be doing going forward.
More along the lines of operational, someone made a comment about the restrooms and lines and kind of, you know, that whole process. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Right. Yeah. What is happening? And it seems like no theater on earth ever has enough restrooms anyway. So you're taking the situation that already is less than ideal. And we've certainly been looking at how we can address that and reduce the capacity in those spaces, as well as also make sure that the ventilation is really excellent in those spaces, and that those smaller enclosed areas have really top of the line filtration. So we've been addressing that, and it can in some cases a simple approach, like just propping a door open so people don't have to touch the door. Where can we reduce touch points and maximize the frequency of sanitization in order to keep those spaces safe? Those things are part of our reopening plan. And that's the best way that we have been able to approach that so far. Limiting elevator capacities is one thing. How can we make sure that we're not getting too high of a density of people in those elevators? Where there are lines, as I said, how can we make sure that they're spaced out? And how can social distancing happen in the restrooms? And so it's sort of a trade-off of maybe closing certain sinks in order to create more space, maybe saying that certain fixtures are not able to be used in order to create more space between people. We've certainly done that so far backstage and in our offices, and have had good success with it in that context.
People are really embracing virtual options. And a few people have asked, why not both? Why not in person and virtual?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. And we're exploring that for some of our performing arts events that for instance, our modern dance presentations, or some of the contemporary theater or classical music that we do, we would like to offer that option. It's something that for touring Broadway is particularly complex because of organizations like Actors Equity, which is the labor union that represents our actors and stage managers. There are many, many different interests involved in a Broadway production, and securing the rights to present that online can be very, very complicated. So it's something that I honestly don't foresee happening on a large scale for touring Broadway, where our focus, I think both in Broadway in New York and on the road, is really to bring people together as a community in the theater to have that shared experience in real time and space. And that may mean that we need to wait a while before we restart those experiences in order to be able to do it in a healthy way.
So someone asked, why not simply cancel the entire 2021 season to allow vaccines to come into play? You know, that breaks my heart, that question.
Right. Yeah, I think our hope is to do the hard work to get folks back as soon as we can, but to, sort of as Lauren shared initially, to do that with the guiding principle of health and safety for our audiences and our staff and our artists. And this is a situation that has changed nearly every day since the middle of March. And I think it will continue to evolve and will continue to be guided by that principle of health being paramount. And that when we do welcome people back into the theater, we'll have all of the protocols in place and communicated clearly to you in advance. So we're really taking it on a show by show, week by week basis at this point.
You talked about Aladdin earlier and trying to get it back, and people are really, really eager. So just pointing out that everyone was pretty sad about that, which we've heard since COVID came into play and we had to shut down that performance. So I thought it was just worth mentioning.
Yeah, that's so true. I was one of the fortunate few people who did get to see the show here in Austin on opening night, and it was really brilliant and had such incredible production values and a great cast. And so that is a personal priority for me. I had planned to bring my daughter to see I think it was Wednesday evening performance, that first one that we canceled. And so I think I'm still in hot water at home for her, having not gotten to see it. So you can add her and I onto the list of champions and advocates for getting that production back to Austin.
A lot of questions are about, longtime subscribers who, have great seats and want, some flexibility there, which you have talked about. The options that we've given previously for shows that we've canceled thus far have been, to potentially turn those into donations or credits for a future season. So that will continue on, and obviously is show specific as we're kind of dealing with each one. I wanted to just share that in general because it's come up several times, and I know you've kind of addressed it. I don't know that there is much else to say about that other than we definitely will get in contact with people that have messaged us in the chat that need some assistance. So I'll make sure we get those phone calls made to them as soon as possible to deal with individual needs and requests.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's worth saying again, our subscribers are the heart of Broadway in Austin. That's what makes the series possible. And your support and investment, and in many cases, these are real long-term relationships where you have those seats and you've made memories with your family and your friends, and it's a ritual or a tradition that's so important to me, certainly, and it's I know it is to many subscribers, and we want to continue that relationship through this extraordinarily difficult time. So I think to underline what you're saying, Tara, please do get in touch with us, contact the Subscriber Center, and let's see what we can do to work out something that feels good for everyone.
That pretty much wraps that up. There's, again, additional questions that I think we need to address directly with each patron. So. I
see there is a question, maybe just to loop back to where I started around Aladdin and A Bronx Tale. Both of those cancellations should have been processed and reflected in everyone's subscription account. So if you feel like that hasn't come through, again, that's a really good reason to get in touch with us so we can help track that down with you because those refunds were processed, or in many cases, actually, folks very, very generously decided to convert their tickets into a donation, which went to support actors and musicians during this time. So if you feel like maybe that wasn't 100% sorted out on your account, or you're not sure what the status of that is, again, please get in touch with us so we can help square that away. And I also saw a note in the chat referring to the regulatory environment. What is the position of our elected leadership around the capability of theaters and venues to reopen? And that's been really critical. We're, with the support of Broadway across America and our peers around the state, staying in very close touch with the governor's office and the strike force to reopen the economy. And they've been very supportive of recognizing the importance of the creative industries generally. And the current regulation that is correct, that venues at this point can be open at 50% capacity. And we are in direct and frequent touch with the governor's office about how they might see that evolving going forward. Tara, if there aren't any other broad themes coming out in the questions, I think we'll stop there. And I'll thank you all so much for your support of Broadway in Austin and of Texas Performing Arts and of live entertainment generally. It's been a real challenge, certainly for our organization, for organizations around the country, for our actors, our musicians, our stage managers, our technicians, the truck drivers, press agents. Just theater is a team sport. It takes so many people to put these productions on, and everybody on the team is really hurting. And this is a moment where live performance, to me, feels like it's more needed than ever, that we need those collective moments of shared joy and pleasure and inspiration that theater gives us. So we're working hard to get back to that as soon as we can. We really miss you all and can't wait to see you back in the theater. And as I said, as the situation continues to evolve, we'll do our best to communicate with you clearly about how we're thinking about it and what you can expect going forward. So a real heartfelt thank you for your patronage and support and for being with us this afternoon to talk about the road to reopening and the path back for Broadway. So thank you all so very much. Take care, and we'll see you in the theater soon, I hope.